My DXpedition, which went from 65 to 68 or 67, was, and I say mine, my ventures, me and Chuck mostly, were during a very bad part of the sunspot cycle. It was very hard to contact certain parts of the world, certain parts of the U.S. at times. I got it down to where I understood the best times. And to get back to Rhode Island, that was a success. I can't remember. I think we used KG61D, D for Don, and that was suggested by Bob. And that was quite successful. It was impressive seeing natives and how friendly they were and how much help we had from the military and from the natives. It was a great one, and there are some pictures around. I might add that I'm going to talk about one of the bad parts of my life, the low points, in which I spent some time in prison later. And during that time, unfortunately, my storeroom was not paid for, ransacked. I lost a lot of collectible items, which I had collected for years, personal things, and all of a huge suitcase and a box full of small plastic and metal boxes of Kodachrome and Ektachrome color slides of all of our stops gone. Besides that expedition, while I was in the military, which was with the help of the military, I was trying to figure out a way to get to Spratly Island. And by the way, the call sign when we got there, 1S9WNV, was also suggested by Bob White. S for Spratly. One wasn't taken, so we invented it. Another expedition occurred with the help of the Navy to a place which was then known as Parisi Vila. I remember flying over to Tachikawa and taking this vessel down there from southern Japan. It took about a couple of days. I can't remember exactly. Parisi Vila. Now it's called I can't pronounce it. It has a new name. Spratly Islands was very hotly contested, and that's for later, so let's focus on Parisi Vila. Parisi Vila, which now has another name, was like this rock, which I understand now has been converted into a resort. And it wasn't easy to get on there, and we had help from the military. And it was actually claimed mostly by Japan, and a lot of the islands in the South China Sea were under dispute. The Philippines, China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Japan, all claimed some of these. Spratly Island came later, as I recall, because while assigned to Korea, we had the Rhode Island expedition and the Parisi Vila expedition, which the Parisi Vila only lasted a couple of days. I can't remember the call sign. Later, when I was through with the military, continued in communication with Chuck Swain, K7LMU, who was still stationed in Vientiane, southern Laos. And at Vientiane is right on the Mekong River. It separates Laos from Thailand at that particular point. We had this plan, which I went through with, lugging this equipment across the Pacific. During the entire expedition, it was done on about $75 a day expenses, including transportation, food, you name it. But we had some help. In the beginning, it was Ackerman, Everett Ackerman, W4ECI, who had sponsored a little bit of Danny's exploits, Danny Weil, although Dick Spenceley was the key person there. And recently, Marty Lane has written a very nice story about Danny. I forgot. By the way, I've had a stroke about 13 years ago, and sometimes I forget where I'm going with this, so excuse the disassociation. I was preparing to get back across the Pacific. We had help. There was an official, I believe it was Continental Airlines, who was a ham. He wasn't the president of the airline, but he was very highly ranked. And he got us some tickets. Me at first, and later Chuck and I. And I had some help from Collins Radio to get that equipment. Didn't take long before my personal savings were expended. ACK helped us out. He had an organization called the Worldwide Radio Propagation Association, which got funding, grants, for submitting logs from different parts of the world so that the radio authorities in Geneva, the international authorities, could better predict propagation. And he financed us to some extent. I cannot think of the call sign of our QSL manager. ACK took care of that at first, but it was a DXer from St. Louis. He was so gracious and gave us so much of his time. One of the things I did was to invent a new type of log that would make it easier. And it was 2 sheets of paper. The second sheet it used what we called NCR paper. And it just had the essential information, where I was operating from, the date, the time, the station exchanges, and we could get about 25 or 30 entries per page. And I could remove the second page and have 2 copies. Later, when the Colvins were on their DXpedition, I got them I helped some other expeditions when mine was done, and they were one. Lloyd Colvin and his wife went many places. Many of them weren't rare, but in those days, it took something to keep DX going. There wasn't a lot of interest when the sunspot cycle was low. It wasn't easy like it has been recently on 40 meters, for example. So that was one of the things that helped a lot. And when we had almost waterproof containers that we could protect these logs, and when we get anywhere that had a post office, I'd mail them back to my QSL manager. Everybody got a QSL. And we tried to QSL every single person, whether we received one or not. And Chuck had a friend of his design a particular type of QSL we had, which used bamboo shoots, bamboo design, oriental design for the letters. And if you've seen them, you'll know what I'm talking about. I'm sorry I can't remember the name and call sign of my QSL manager for all those years. It was a blessing. I took off for Fiji and operated a VR2 amateur radio, had a station there. I operated in a contest. At one time, I think I had contest records for CQ, WW, DX contests, ARRL contests on different bands and modes. It wasn't difficult when you were in a rare location. And I tried to keep track of the dates of these contacts. If I could get into a place that had was well timed, it was during a DX contest, that would also bring a very high, very dense pileup. And it was fun. Going across the Pacific, I was pretty surprised to learn how rare even American Samoa was. I think it was 5W1 was one of our first stops. It was not hard to get there. A short sail from Pago Pago to Apia, which was then called British Samoa or Western Samoa. And the New Hebrides. Now, these stations were maybe in the top 25 or 30 of the most wanted stations among DXers, but or DXCC chasers. There were always pileups, like they were rare, and there seemed to be a lot of interest in my DXpedition because there wasn't a lot of DX activity at the time, or else the sunspot cycle contributed to the point where it was probably more focused on than usual. I went to 4 or 5 places I think Manihiki, Tonga, and even New Caledonia seem to be pretty rare. Many of these island groups, such as New Hebrides, New Caledonia, Fiji, Tonga, had their own airlines just starting up, mostly prop planes. And we could get pretty cheap rides most of the time, even with all the equipment. Now, during that time, I met a gentleman named Jack Astley from Wellington, New Zealand, who had built this Piver trimaran. If you're not familiar with trimarans and catamarans, they float. They have 2 or 3 hulls. This was a small, 30-foot long trimaran with 3 hulls. The middle hull was the big one, and I had a little gas lantern in there where I could sit and write on a little table, and a little galley to cook. The side pontoons, the side hulls were just for storage. Big trimarans and catamarans were different. They had a lot more room. I learned how to navigate, and our navigation was pretty crude. We had a sextant, which was kind of a plastic sextant, which is kind of warped. We used WWV when I could always get one of their frequencies strong enough, and the nautical almanac. With the sextant and the angle of the sun, and we tried the moon also, didn't work so good. And the nautical almanac charts and the WWV time signal, we could chart a dot where we were on the map and our course. I met Jack, and we sailed 2 or 3 of those on the Edward Bear, which was the name of his trimaran. I've tried to locate him since then in New Zealand. I can't find him. Then I met later, and I'll skip ahead here because we're in this area of the Pacific, a doctor from Hawaii named Rudy Egley, who was more interested in sailing than medicine. And he had about a 42-foot ketch called the Marinero. It wasn't real seaworthy. We leaked quite often, but he was a good sailor, and his girlfriend was with him. Her name was Karen Onishi. She was a former Miss Hawaii, or runner-up Miss Hawaii, and they were on this ketch, and I made arrangements at that time and for later on to charter him and take us to different places. That would be the ketch that went down in the hurricane later on. I made it across, and we went to Spratly, and I have pretty dim memories. I remember the one main island. It was almost like an atoll, not quite. We had to take, I don't remember, I once had all of these logs of every step of the way, and that was lost, as I explained. But as I recall, it wasn't difficult. Where we landed was not a difficult landing. That's when 1S9WNV was used for a call sign. Spratly was in dispute. We didn't have any hostilities. These were all new DXCC countries. Parisi Vila was new because it was separated sufficiently from the other countries, and due to the sovereignty, the separation, Spratly was new. The call signs, again, were suggested by Bob White. I or we, depending on whether I was with Chuck or the military. There was one of the pilots was also a ham, did some phone operating with me. They were fun, but a little bit risky, to say the least. Chuck and I wound up together in Laos. I was unofficially with the CIA. They used the fact that I was a physician under some program to get different places. Chuck was a master of all of this. I would have never done this. Burma was probably number 1. Indonesia was probably number 2. Now, Laos, and I have a few stories to tell, at the northern part of Laos, the northwestern part, as I recall. I don't have a map in front of me, but it goes across Thailand into Burma. Chiang Mai is in northern Thailand, and Chiang Rai goes across into Burma. Somewhere in that area, and Thailand in between was very friendly, because they were at the time, and maybe now, our strongest ally in Southeast Asia. We had an Air Force base, one of them there. And it was not difficult to get through Thailand into Burma. Burma was brand new for all purposes. And some of these countries were numbered in the top 5 most wanted. Well, we got no problem getting into Burma. We went across on a road. We had a 4-wheel vehicle. We had a guide, Chuck and me, all kinds of equipment. And we got across, and we got into some forested area, and there was, up on a hill, we got up there and set up a station. And I think it was W9WNV / X, whatever the call sign was for Burma at the time. Now it's called Myanmar. There was war going on at the time amongst all these countries, mostly communist against the free world. But we didn't run into any going into Burma. We set up a really good tent there that Chuck had, a pretty good size one that could sleep 2 people. We had a table, a portable table, like a couple of horses and a flat top that folded out. Plenty of room for the receiver, the transmitter, a small light, a little tiny fan. It was great. And everything was set up, had a cot there to lay down. We got the tribanders, the equipment that we took across the voyage, that I took into Southeast Asia, consisted of a tribander, high-gain tribander, which was cut down so it could be easily assembled into smaller parts, a 10-foot, as I recall, tripod, metal tripod, and with a hole in it for a pipe, which would be the mast. And even when we didn't have that little rotator with us, we could turn it by hand for the tribander. And we would run dipoles between trees or whatever was available, and a vertical. The tribander, the vertical, and dipoles, coax was being run, it would come into the tent. Well, got everything all set up, and Chuck and the guide took off in this vehicle. We're going to get some supplies, come back. Oh, they didn't come back that night. They came back a day later. Well, it started raining. I don't mean raining. I mean pouring rain. Lightning all night long, so bright that it lit up the whole forest, everything. Thunder continuously, torrential rain. It wasn't a typhoon. There was no wind. It was just, I've never been in rain like that. And here I am, sitting at this table, operating, and there was a lot of atmospheric noise from the rain, from the storm, and the conditions weren't that good to start with. I had open-toe shoes on, as I recur. My feet were soaking wet. I'm sitting there like a human lightning rod, and I could feel some electricity, some shocks from nearby strikes. And I thought, when in the H is this going to hit me, you know? Well, we got through it. And I'll get back to that in a minute. But Chuck came back a day later. What's going on? Come on. So, now, by the way, Chuck operated phone. He didn't do CW. And that brings up a China expedition, which very few people know about. But first, I want to tell you, and I've told this story at DX club meetings and Visalia and places. I took a break during that storm, and I laid down and got about an hour's sleep. I said a prayer like I usually do, going to bed, and I thought to myself, we often think, what would we like to be doing at the time we're taken from this earth? Well, here I am, in the rarest place in the world, operating DX, working a pileup. If lightning strikes and I have to go, maybe this would be the way to do it, you know, because I was really scared, truthfully. One of the 3 or 4 times most scared during this whole 3-year period. That was quite an exciting new country. Unfortunately, and I'm going to get to this, I did some things that were kind of stupid that kind of cast a shadow of doubt on some of our hard-earned earlier operations. Cambodia was not difficult. Cambodia borders on the south part of Laos, as I remember. We went down there. Chuck had no problem getting us in. That was a brand new, well, I say they're new countries. There were a few people that had them, but they hadn't been operated in decades. And Vietnam was rare, but it's right next to where he could get, and we didn't, there was no fighting where we were. We didn't have a problem with that one. These were all planned and orchestrated by Chuck Swain. Most of the operations in Southeast Asia, which were new countries or hadn't been operated for so long, I would say all of these were on the top 5 or 6 most wanted list of DXers. For example, Burma, which is now Myanmar, Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia. Chuck, who had been stationed in Vientiane with the CIA, had connections and knew his way around. He was a brilliant man that could figure out almost a way to do almost anything. I would never have been able to go to these places had it not, and been safe had it not been for Chuck. Now, Burma was not difficult to get into. The northern part of Burma, with a little strip of Thailand in between, is next to the northern part of Laos, where Chuck was stationed. And it was really nothing to get through Thailand, which was our strongest ally in Southeast Asia, across to Chiang Rai to get into Burma that way. We just, there was, where we went in, it was just a road. There was no military at that point, but he knew ahead of time where we were going to go. And we had a 4-wheel drive vehicle with plenty of fuel and a guide, and who spoke some English. Getting in was not a problem. Getting out of Burma was something else. I've already told you the story about the night of torrential rain, the first night of operation in Burma. When that operation was complete and we were to go back, I don't think directly to another country, but back into Thailand to operate, or across Thailand and back into Laos and get back to Vientiane, where Chuck was stationed, we had a problem. We went a different way back, which was a main route, heavily guarded with military. And these were communists. There was a war going on, different versions of war in different places in that part of the world. And the communists were taking over, or trying to take over, Burma at that point. So literally we were confronted by the Red Army to get out of there. And we were in the vehicle. And there was a guide, and Chuck and myself and all of our equipment packed up. We were treated very hostilely. Everything was taken out of the truck, subjected to some kind of an inquisition. I didn't understand the language, but we had our passports, and the guide was of some help. We tried to explain this was amateur radio. This was not for fun, but this was for good communications in case of disaster. and that I was also there for medical reasons, which was an excuse we used for backup, because Chuck had obtained a medical pass for me, which was good for some crossings in some countries that bordered on Laos. We were sat down. They didn't point guns at us, but it was pretty obvious that we were suspected of being the enemy for these particular uniformed people. And we tried the best to explain that this was for public service, this was for the good of everybody. We're not part of any military. There's no military involved. This took, I thought we were going to be put into custody and put somewhere, and we'd lose our equipment. The equipment was taken out of the we had Collins equipment taken out of the Collins containers. We had boxes full of wires, dipoles, everything in the books. And we tried to explain this is microphone and this is key, not military. We tried everything we could think of. We got somebody to come there from the Thailand side that could speak interpreted for a while. And it was very exhausting and scary, because there had been prisoners, the communists in Korea, a lot further north, and also in this part of the world, were imprisoning suspects, and we were Americans, and that was not popular with this group. So this was difficult to get out of there. They finally threw the stuff back in the boxes and said, go ahead. They made some notes, took some pictures, and that was it. So getting out of Burma was difficult. I should also mention that Chuck was in a very precarious position. He didn't have, by design, ID on him with the CIA or his station information or his rank or anything like that. So he didn't, of course, want them to know where he was from and who he represented. So it was very perilous for Chuck as well. So we had to be very careful about everything there at that point. So that was one of the most difficult confrontations, along with the episode in Hakmel, Haiti, when we were detained, and a couple of others. I thought it was worthy of mention. Today's DXpeditions don't seem to have the risk like that, although there have been tales of a couple of U.S. hams operating or trying to operate from North Korea with similar implications. I was unofficially employed with the service, with the agency, as a physician to try to justify our presence in Laos to assist the anti-communist freedom people who normally govern that country. And we were shot down there as well. Chuck and I were in a C-46, the Goonie Bird, two-engine prop plane. I can't remember all the details, but we wound up in a position halfway in the jungle and with no compass, very little. And we wanted to get back to Vientiane, which was a long way, probably, well, at least 20 miles or more from where we were at that time. It was a malfunction or something. C-46s had seen their day, and they were still being used in places. Even Osan Air Force Base had one or two in South Korea where I had been stationed. I had some gold. This is almost pure gold, 24 karat, I think, soft gold bracelet. And for this purpose, and I flew about 4 missions of this type. But this was something that just came up out of the blue, and there were a couple of natives. We wanted them to get us back. They knew where we were going. Chuck and I gave up a link of this gold to these people, and we went. I don't know how they got. It was pretty bad jungle, a lot of insects and occasional snake, but it was just, we weren't dressed for the occasion, and we got back to base. It took a few hours, and I don't mention that too much because wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. But Chuck was employed by the CIA, and I was going to be discharged from my term in the Air Force in Korea the same time he had finished down there, and we were in communication almost every night on I think it was 40 meters. Chuck had a nice apartment there where he lived while he worked for them, and he had his antennas on the roof, he had an air conditioner in the window, all the comforts of home. Anyway, Chuck had extended when I came back and met him there, and he worked for the agency. I was not officially working for them. When I finished my service in the Air Force, I decided I wanted to enlist in the Peace Corps. The head of the Peace Corps was Sergeant Shriver. I believe he's the father of Maria Shriver, who was married to Arnold Schwarzenegger, the actor who was also governor of California for a short, unfortunate time. Everybody that joined the Peace Corps had to have an interview at Sergeant Shriver's office. I was in Washington to meet him in this huge office. There was a Jerry Lewis film about something like this. I had to walk and walk and walk just to get to his desk in that room. So he wanted to know why I was interested in the Peace Corps, and I told him I've been serving my country, my whole family has, finished this work in Korea, but I said there's an ulterior motive too. I'm an amateur radio operator. This would help communications there wherever I'm assigned, but it would also give me an opportunity to practice DXing. I explained it to him. And he had concluded that he had a better use for me than the Peace Corps. He knew I was a physician. He made an appointment with me with another government official, and that's how I wound up being sent to Laos. In fact, I had told them I had a friend who worked over there for the agency. I don't talk too much about that. I had pictured myself being in Africa and helping medical care there and having a little ham transceiver there and being able to do some fun DXing at the same time. And that didn't come about. But that's how I happened to wind up there and being with Chuck again. There was an operation from China which I totally had forgotten about until a few years ago. I was in Helsinki visiting Marty Lane, and he arranged some type of an interview there, which I understand he has choreographed into a 7-part series where he asked me about a lot of these things with a group of his Finnish DXers present and made a video of that. He asked me about BY4SK. Well, when he first asked me about that prior to the interview, I had forgotten about it. And people had asked, I said, that wasn't mine. I had nothing to do with it. But he said, your QSL card is the same. Then I remembered what happened. Chuck didn't operate CW. He had to pass his exam, I think, to get his license. But he couldn't operate a keyer or a bug, but he could operate a straight key. And I spent quite a few hours teaching him Morse code on the straight key, the Morse International Code. And he could slowly copy call signs. So that, because Marty said this was a very slow Chinese ham. I said, then I realized this was Chuck. There's a part of Ainan province in China, it's at the northern part of Laos, and he could get in there. We had also eventually a transceiver. Oh, excuse me, Chuck owned the transceiver, that was his, and the straight key. He didn't do any phone. He was afraid to do phone operation from there because nobody knew what he was doing on code. Some of the hams listening to him might not either. But he worked quite a few stations. There were about 9 pages of logs from BY4SK. That was our operation. It was strictly Chuck's. And that was his CW. That was his fist on the hand key. That's a true story. No, I just didn't remember it. And then people have asked me about other places that I can't remember. Especially now, when I had my stroke, I lost a lot of this up here. And without my color slides and without all that stuff, I can't, my logs, I can't do more than just tell you what I remember. So the Southeast Asia operations were the best part of our DXpedition, the least controversial. Following that, and Spratley, we did some traveling. We had a couple of tickets, and I met up again with, eventually wound up in, we had some operations from the northern and later from Manihiki. One was Northern Cook, Southern Cook, but from both ships, the Edward Bear was still in the Pacific. It had gone down to Wellington. And I wanted to go very much to Niue Island. Niue Island is right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, with nothing anywhere near it, just a little rock sticking out with trees. And so we went to Niue Island, actually on, it was on Rudy Egley's ship, the Marinero, the one that we eventually lost in the hurricane. And it was a real thrill operating there. And the natives greeted us and helped us take the gear ashore. They had a little shack there we could use for a ham shack. And I'm going to bring up something very controversial. Well, first of all, I want to tell you, I had discussions. At one point, we were there, and the natives were feeding us pretty well, and we had some supplies, but mostly dehydrated food. A couple of them came running and said, "Hey, your ship is floating around. It had broke loose from the mooring." So Reedy and I went down there, stripped down, and dove in to swim out to the boat. And he's a great swimmer. I'm a pretty good. I did long distance swimming as a kid. But he was great. He got there before I did. And I went under, and here's a hammerhead shark right in front of me, like it was staring at me. My blood, I shivered, and I can't tell you how scary this was. I looked at it, kept it in my sight, and it went under, and I didn't know if it was chasing me, it was going to eat me, or what. And I was yelling when I got to the boat, and Rudy helped me on it. And we got it back to mooring. He said, "Oh, don't worry about that." I said, "Don't worry about it?" Well, shortly after that, I had a discussion with Dr. Egley. I said, "Rudy, if there's a storm coming here, what would you do?" "Oh, I'd get on the ship and make a run for it and save the ship." I said, "Well, maybe you're going to do that, but I'm staying here, you know." And that eventually wasn't a joke, because that's what happened later when the hurricane came. But that experience with the shark was something that's hard to describe. Just one. I could picture a whole bunch of them, you know, circling around. So Niue Island was a pleasure. That was fun. But the thing that came to effect later was that the natives that were helping us said, "Why are you bringing all this stuff on shore? Why don't you just operate from the ship like Danny did?" I didn't know that Danny Weil operated some of his. I found out later from another place, same thing. I didn't know he was operating from his ship. Now, I'm telling you this, I don't want to disparage anybody. Danny did a lot for DXing, and he was all we had for a while till Gus Browning came along. And the tributes that Marty Lane gave to him, because Marty was part of that organization, are well deserved. But it became important to me later, and I'll explain that. While I was in the Pacific with Chuck, we did the first, what was fake operations, using a call sign from places that we weren't there. And I'm not going to make any excuses, that just isn't right. But I want to tell you that the one place I wanted to go the most was St. Peter and St. Paul's Rocks. It was almost innavigable, but a very good friend of mine and the DXpedition, Sonia, PY2SO, her husband was also Ham. I don't know if she's still down there in Sao Paulo. She managed to get permission for our DXpedition to go to and operate ham radio from PY2. We were assigned a call sign. So that was the goal, to finish up a few places in the Pacific, what we could. And about that time, I found out that a catamaran with a couple of German sailors on it, whom we had met in one of the ports, a very beautiful ship, big catamaran, had landed there and operated a ham radio and contacted about 25 stations. And that ARRL was counting those for DXCC. My heart was broken because I wanted to be the first. But then, in communicating with Sonia, I found out that the government, the Radio Communication Authority in Brazil, had notified ARRL that they didn't have permission to operate from there. They did have permission to sail in that area, but the league counted the contacts anyway. Now, a number of those contacts were with members of a particular DX club, which I wasn't very friendly with. It came from my refusal to work certain people. One of the bad mistakes I made during my DXpedition, and I'll explain more about that. I decided right then and there that if we couldn't get somebody to take us there, I was going to fake that operation. I figured if they're going to count that one, they should count ours. That's the reasoning I was using. But something happened a little after that, or around that time. We were back in Samoa. Oh, I want to tell you another story. The first time I was in Samoa, I met Jack Astley there with the Edward Bear, the little trimaran. And who comes sailing in but Robin Lee Graham was his name. National Geographic was sponsoring this young kid, about 15 years old, to sail around the world in a little sloop, which really only meant for maybe San Francisco Bay, called the Dove. And it took the headline in National Geographic for a long time, and they were sponsoring him. Well, on the way to Samoa, he had demasted. He lost his mast, and he was a great young sailor. He had his little cat aboard, and they came in there without a mast. Well, I helped him because he needed a new mast. There was poor communication part of the time, and I got a hold of somebody. Ack helped. I got a hold of Ack Ackerman, and we had a new mast shipped to Robin. And I had left there before he did, but he got everything fixed and on his way again around the world.